Okay, as promised, I wanted to go over a bit of the history of the formation of our modern understandings of race, which occurred during the time period we're studying in chapters 1 and 2. I was told that it's better to have a video of me talking that holds your interest more. So let me know how that works out. If it works or not, I'm perfectly happy hiding myself and not being on camera. Okay, so the invention of race, 1450, 1700. This is a Spain and Portugal edition. I'll give you a little bit of a different history when it comes to France and England. Again, the very notion that different empires would have different understandings of race suggests that this is not a real thing. Right? It's as we'll talk about, a social construct. It's constructed through specific historical and material conditions. Okay, so what are the ones that we're talking about here? I'll go over them. There's three of them. The first is exploration, quote unquote, right? This is imperialism. This is primarily the Portuguese, but then the Spanish also, trying to find a way around the Arab traders who control trade in North Africa and in the Eastern Mediterranean. Ultimately, they want to find a way to West Africa and to Asia, right? West Asia and East Asia. That is the first part of the story. The second part of the story is the Reconquista. From the year 711 to 1492, you have first the Moorish kingdoms of North Africa pushing north in on the Iberian Peninsula, and then the Christian forces pushing back south till finally the last Muslims are expelled in 1492. They want to convert non-Christians, and they also want to grow commodity crops like sugar in the area that they have reconquered. They don't stop at Gibraltar. They keep going. They start conquering North Africa. They conquer Portugal, conquers the Azores, the Canary Islands, Madeira. So the idea that, right, these European powers are already expanding their empires even before they discover the New World, and that's really important. The last part of the story is the Enlightenment. And the idea, and this is later, obviously, in this timeline, but the idea of putting people in categories, logical categories, assigning races to people that somehow make some kind of quote unquote scientific sense, right? So that the world is very tidy, very orderly, very enlightenment-y. Okay, so part one, exploration. Again, this is imperialism. So obviously, you know from AP World or patterns that Mansa Musa literally puts West Africa on the map of Europe. This is a map, early 14th century map of Mansa Musa. He, of course, his claim to fame is going on a Hajj to Mecca, in which they give out so much gold that they create hyperinflation along the route. I mean, that's pretty, that's a pretty serious flex, right? When you cause hyperinflation over a whole region because you're giving out gold. Well, anyway, Europeans notice that, and they realize that West Africa is a part of the world where they want to trade. They want to trade with the kingdoms there. Unfortunately, Arab or Muslim traders control all the trade networks in North Africa. Again, from the year 711 to 1492, the Moorish kingdoms of North Africa are at war with European kingdoms. So the Europeans want to try to find a way to go around those trade networks. Here's old Henry the Navigator from Portugal, who finances, bankrolls a lot of these navigation projects, builds up the navy, all that stuff, precisely as it shows here, right, to go around these Muslim trade routes into West Africa. They go looking for goods. They find goods. They also find slaves. And as it turns out, because of the desire to grow more commodity crops, those slaves become very important. And I'll say more about that in a second. In 1453, the fall of Constantinople really kind of doubles down on this. The kingdoms in the east don't want to trade with the Europeans either. So the only way to East Asia, West Asia, and Africa is to sail there yourself. Obviously, if we think of the Atlantic here, picture the big picture. Portugal comes in first, starts to consolidate colonial centers along the coast of Africa. So what, of course, does Spain do? They go that way, right? Trying to do a kind of end around on the end around of Portugal. Okay. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church gets involved with these thing called papal bulls. That's not bull like horn. That's a bulla, like a big wax seal. So it's an official Vatican like declaration. They're called papal bulls. There's several of them. Dom Diversas, which is Pope Nicholas, pictured here, Nicholas V, 1452. He has another one, Romanus Pontifex, a couple of years later. These have to do with converting or finding these new lands, and basically, right, the doctrine of discovery is effectively, to use a kind of simplified term, it's finders keepers. If Portugal finds it, they keep it. If Spain finds it, they keep it. It's theirs, whatever, all the lands they see. And there's a whole rigmarole. They've got to read a thing and put the flag in, and that whole you can imagine it, right? So that's one part of these papal bulls is as you discover territory in West Africa and other parts of the world, it's yours. And part of the thing you have to do is to put the people that you colonize into perpetual servitude. This obviously expands the slave trade. You can't enslave Christians. You can't have Christian slaves. So these, heathens are the perfect kind of target to be enslaved. Perpetual servitude we can get into a more complicated discussion of what that means. It does mean laboring. It means being put to work, but it also has religious connotations of the serving your Lord, right? Perpetual servitude to the Lord and Savior kind of thing. All this kind of Christian stuff, right? So it has a double meaning, but in the end, right, you're like they're enslaving people, and they're enslaving people because who's going to work in those fields, right? As they start exploring the coast of Africa, they discover Madeira and the Azores, which are not even inhabited by people. The Canary Islands do have an indigenous people there. Spain subjugates them, murders them pretty quickly. But these are places that are perfect for growing one of the big commodity crops of the time period, which is sugarcane. Previously, they had to get it from Arabic traders. No longer, right? They can grow it themselves in the Canary Islands, Madeira, the Azores, and then, of course, later in Haiti and the Caribbean. But you have to have people to work the fields, and who's going to do it, right? Christians can't do it, so it's going to be these enslaved heathens. Meanwhile, the Reconquest. So as a kind of case study, we'll look at the Reconquest and La Sistema de Casta, which is the caste system for Spain. So the La Sistema de Casta means a caste system, but it also means like a breed or lineage or race. There's another notion in Spain at this time called limpieza de sangre, which is purity of blood. Why they're doing this is because after they reconquered the peninsula, you, again, can't enslave converts. If you convert to Christianity, you're formerly Muslim or you're Jewish. There's huge Jewish population, obviously a huge Muslim population, that stay in the Iberian Peninsula. They convert, but the question always is, did you really convert? Are you secretly practicing your faith? So there's an anxiety around this, and that's where they come up with this idea of limpieza de sangre, right? Pure Catholic blood, pure Spanish blood, and la sistema de casta, right? A caste system. So, right, if you're the pure one, you're on top. If you're like a convert, you're a little lower, right? So you identify them, you put them in categories, etc. You can see where we haven't talked anything about race yet, but you can see how we're starting to see the structure of a hierarchy being put in place. The hierarchy in the old world is a religious hierarchy, right? Catholics don't like Jews and Muslims. They don't like Protestants once Protestants show up. So all of the conflict in the old world is often about religion. Once we enter the new world, that translates to race, right? So it's no longer an anxiety around people who you're not sure about their religion. It becomes an anxiety around people you're not sure about their race. So you have this sistema de casta translated from religion to race in the new world. And race is the problem of the new world. Religious conflicts in the new world are pretty minimal, where they define Europe, right? Religious conflict defines European history for centuries. Once we get to the new world, it's really not about religion anymore, but it does become very much about race, which isn't a thing in Europe, right? No one cares about race in Europe. It's about religion or territory or what have you. Okay, so as it were, right, these ideas are converted from religious ones to race ones. Here's a little case study. They actually have a whole genre of painting called casta paintings, which are supposed to depict the various categories of, races in the New World. Peninsulare, that is on top, that is someone born on the peninsula. Criollo, Indio, Negro. Indio and Negro are kind of equals on the bottom. Very interesting, of course, is that a peninsulare, you have to be born in Spain. So if I'm born in Spain and I have a little brother that's 9 months younger than me, and he is born the day the family gets off the boat in, Cuba or something, my little brother's a criollo. I'm peninsulare. You have to be born on the peninsula. And this, of course, again, shows you this anxiety around race. If you're born in the New World, can we really ever be sure that we know who your father is? We always know who the mother is. But can we ever really be sure that we know who the father is? So these 4 categories are multiplied 100-fold. And you kind of see here in detail, these are all various kind of very miniature casta paintings. You have a mulatto con española, you get a morisco. Yeah, you have a morisco and a española, you get a chino. Chino con India, salta alta. So you have all of these various, it's preposterous, right? The division of categories goes on and on and on. But this was how the Spanish conceived of a racial hierarchy. Peninsulares on top, criollos below, and then any number, whether it's 2 or 200, there's all of these other categories below it. Okay. Meanwhile, the Enlightenment. Enlightenment is all about categories. So you see it kind of the Enlightenment gone wrong with this notion of a sistema de casta with race in the New World. It's almost laughable, but it's supposed to be scientific, right? We need to have, if you mix this and this, what do you get? And if you mix that with this, what do you get? So this is an Enlightenment idea. And it's about categorizing, describing, and understanding, right, scientifically, quote unquote, who is who and who belongs where. Who can you enslave and who can't you enslave? Who is pure and who is not pure? So it's all of these factors coming together. And we see that in these casta paintings, right? That these casta paintings emphasize a very particular understanding of race. And that is that mixing with Spanish blood makes you lighter and makes you more Spanish, right? So if you have, someone who's, Indio and a criollo and they have a kid, that kid is going to be more Spanish than someone who is India and mulatto, right? Because you're going to be getting darker versus getting lighter. So this is a very fluid understanding of race that the Spanish have, right? However, peninsulares are on top. This is about supremacy. It's about a form of racial supremacy that is unique to the kind of like Latin American world, right? That it doesn't matter how many categories you have, but who has limpieza de sangre, who has the pure blood, it's the people born in Spain, right? So this is a form of racial supremacy, and it's one that comes about through imperialism, reconquest, and the Enlightenment, right? These three factors coming together to create a notion of race that is, as people say, a social construct, right? It's not real. Race isn't real at all. Even if we're going to think biologically, right? Even biologically, if you think, oh, people in Africa have more DNA, there's more genetic similarities than people in Europe, that's not actually true. People in East Africa have more genetic similarities to someone in, say, Indonesia than they would have with someone in West Africa. Meanwhile, someone in West Africa has more genetic similarities with a random person in, Spain or France. Why? Because of trade networks. You have the monsoon. Come on, you guys all remember this, right? The monsoon winds go from Asia into India into East Africa. That's one trade network. With trade comes, it's not just the intercourse of ideas, right? But sexual intercourse, and people exchange, right? They exchange DNA, right? But they become more genetically similar. Meanwhile, a different thing is happening in North Africa, West Africa, and Europe, as we just, right? If we go back a couple slides here, you see, right, this trade network connects this part of Africa to Europe, where the trade network that would be over here, as it were, connects to East Asia, South Asia, and then East Asia. Okay, so that is the idea of race being a social construct. This is, to close things off, a painting from 1895 that really exemplifies the kind of like Latinate understanding of race. It's called The Redemption of Ham. Ham being a figure in the Bible who's black. By Modesto Brocos, who's a Brazilian artist. And you see the painting, of what it's supposed to represent is you have Granny here, right, who presumably, right, this is Granny's daughter. So you can assume that Granny's husband or the daughter's father was lighter skinned, producing a lighter skinned daughter. The daughter, meanwhile, marries this guy, has a kid with this guy, and you have an even lighter skinned child, right? So, and you have, of course, Granny, right, praising, right, the heavens, and, the baby almost with like a baby Jesus kind of like posture here. This is Brazil. So this is the same in the Spanish colonies, that you can get lighter. You can become white through a process of generations. That is a uniquely Latin understanding of race, and that is a uniquely Latin social construct of race. As we'll see in the next part of this lecture, when we look at France and England, very different understandings of race. For England, it is what we will know as the one-drop rule. This is a law, or a pamphlet about a law that was passed in the 1920s in the South, that said that someone who was white was someone who has no trace whatsoever of any blood other than Caucasian, effectively being what? Limpieza de sangre, right? The American Southern version of purity of blood. This is the one drop rule, right? That if you have one drop of African blood, you're black, right? Half black, black, quarter black, black, 1/8 black, black, 1/16 black, black, and on and on and on, right? One drop. That is really different from what Spain is doing, right? Spain has something very different. Portugal has something very different in their understandings of race than the English do. And as I will point out in the next lecture, it has everything to do with how these various European empires thought about empire and thought about their relationship to Native Americans, to enslaved Africans, to anyone that wasn't what they would consider white and European, right? Okay, so that is part one of the social construction of race. This was the Portugal and Spain edition, highlighting how the Enlightenment, the Reconquest, and imperialism create a specific understanding of race in Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking colonies. Thanks.